Hi everyone, we are back and we're going to be continuing talking about persuasion. This is picking up where we left off before break, so hopefully we can catch on um, with what material we need to. All right, so we left the last video, we left last time talking about Aristotle's persuasive proof. So I'm just going to kind of fly through there. Um, Really, the main focus of the lesson today is to go into further depth with logos, ethos, and pathos, so that we understand how each one of those works in persuasion a little bit more clearly. So we're going to be talking about ethos first today, because that's one that we've already spent a lot of time working on this semester. Way back when, I know it sounds like a lifetime ago, but really early in the semester, we talked about your ethos and what makes you sound like a credible speaker. And we talked about the different components of ethos. Back when we were doing the informative speech, we talked about that background statement. What is it that people need in order to know that you're somebody that they should listen to on this, that you have some sort of, maybe not authority, but you have some sort of credibility. That's super important when you're trying to persuade people because um, uh, we don't believe, we don't, we can't be persuaded by somebody we don't believe or don't trust. So that is why your ethos is really important and really important to establish early on and maintain throughout the speech. All right, so we had talked about the three components of this a while back. So the first component is competence, presenting yourself as somebody who is trained, experienced, knowledgeable, someone who knows what they're talking about. The next thing is goodwill, or we could also use the term charisma because we were trying to mean the three C's with this. So charisma, this is just being a charismatic or likable person, being warm and friendly, enthusiastic. If you look bored or uninspired by your topic, you're going to have a real struggle inspiring others. And then finally, our third element is character. This is just your overall makeup, that you are a trustworthy person, uh, that you proceed with integrity and honesty. This is why you need to incorporate your citations so it doesn't look like you're passing off, first of all, so it doesn't look like you're passing off other people's information as your own, but also so that your audience knows that the sources you are using are ones that have integrity. So it's a chain event, a chain effect that your your integrity is affected by the sources that you are citing. So if you're citing unreliable sources or maybe not the best sources, it is going to affect your own ethos. Okay, moving on. A little bit further, just a couple hints as you're preparing your speech. We want to make sure that you're being truthful, you're not exaggerating. We tend to, as just human beings, want to exaggerate. We want to say that we were stuck in traffic for 20 minutes when we were only stuck for 5 minutes. It's just kind of our human nature. It's really important not to do that with persuasion because it will affect your ethical stance. You also need to present your views fairly. You cannot fall into logical fallacies, which we are going to talk about in another time. It's a big issue. But you do need to present your views in a balanced and fair way. You can't just um, present some sort of false picture of your opponent and expect your audience or a thoughtful audience to take you seriously. You do need to share your motives. If you've got some sort of vested interest in this, in taking the position that you're taking, share it with the audience. And in fact, it might be helpful. It's not something to hide. For example, if you are asking people to donate to some breast cancer awareness group, and you have an aunt who passed away of breast cancer, that's something to share. So you know that you have this vested interest because your family's been affected by it, and that of course is also important because because it makes your topic more relatable when you show that you have a personal connection to the issue. Establishing common ground. Now, I'm going to say this again and again. This is really important, especially for that number line when your audience is on one side and you're on the other. Or am I doing that the backwards way? I can't tell on this camera. But you are, let's see, your audience is over here on that -3 on that number line, and you're over here on that +3 on the number line, and you're trying to get your audience to come closer to you. You want to make sure that you can establish common ground. Your audience, especially one who is really against what you're thinking and what you're saying, needs to know that that you're coming from the same place. I mean, think about it. When people try to persuade you and they are nothing like you and they're misrepresenting what you believe, and yet they're trying to persuade you to come to their side, they're missing it. They're not establishing common ground. You can look at this person and say, hey, we are two really different people. We have nothing in common. That person doesn't understand where I'm coming from. Therefore, they can't persuade me. So that common ground is really tricky to establish, but essential. Dressing appropriately. I know we're doing this all on the screen now, but I am still going to ask you to dress appropriately when you give a speech. For this, it is still business casual, smart casual. This, again, just shows your audience that you respect them, that you are dressing in a way that you took time for. You thought about how you're presenting yourself to them. And we've talked a bit about ethical responsibility. It is your responsibility to put your audience's interests before your own. So if you're talking about something that is going to benefit you exclusively to the detriment of your audience, that is not ethical. So especially if it's to their detriment and you cannot show that there is benefit outside yourself. Telling the truth, we've mentioned that. Treating the audience with respect. Showing them things that are respectful, speaking to them in a respectful manner. This is why we avoid offensive language. So we want to show that we value them. Avoiding harm. Obviously, I mean, it's limited how much physical harm we could possibly cause, but I'm more interested in all sorts of harm, like psychological harm. I can't remember if I've told this story before or not, but I'll give you an example. If you are going to show in your video or your PowerPoint, your visual aid, graphic images or graphic videos, it's important to, clue your audience in, let them know that what they're about to see could be graphic or offensive or troubling. I'll give you an example. A few years back, a student did a speech on cheerleading, a persuasive speech trying to establish that cheerleading is an athletic sport and should be treated and respected as such. That's all well and good. I didn't have issue with that. The issue that I had was she showed a video to support her opinion. She showed a video of different injuries that cheerleaders endure. And I still remember this video of this cheerleader breaking her leg in a really, really graphic way that was filmed. And, did it cause me harm? I don't know, but I sure wish I didn't have to see that because I can still remember it graphically all these years later. It's been at least 6 or 7 years. So that's what I'm talking about. Just a little warning saying, hey, the video I'm about to show or the image I'm about to show could be upsetting. Considering the power of your words. Again, our words are powerful, and making sure that you are just letting people know. Okay, we're going to move on now to logos. So logos is your logical appeal. I don't need to go into a huge amount of depth with this because you just finished your informative speech, and a lot of logic is what you established in your informative speech, which is research, etc., etc. So the main thing here is that our goal with logos is that we are attempting, excuse me, to persuade rather than just lay out facts. So the persuasion goal is what's different with our logical appeal here. All right, so a few kinds of reasoning go into logos or logical appeals. So first we have deductive reasoning. Um, Deductive reasoning is it's a method of reasoning where we start with a general rule and then apply it to a specific case. So if we were looking at it in math, it would be that good old formula. If A equals B and B equals C, therefore we can realize that A equals C. These are two different variations. You don't really need to know it, but do realize that syllogisms and enthymemes, those are two different variations of deductive reasoning. So I know it's really kind of abstract and hard to see. So I'm going to show you, I hope, I hope I'm going to show you. I have an embedded video. I don't know if it's going to work. If it doesn't work, I will give you a link in the YouTube so you can watch it later. The video I'm going to show you is quite funny and a entertaining look at how deductive reasoning can work in a really sarcastic, comedic way. So let's try it. Okay, our next type of reasoning is called inductive reasoning, which basically just flips our pyramid here. And we start with the specific case here, and we end with the general rule, which is the opposite of what we did just a minute ago. If we want to think about that in math terms, that's the assumption that if 1 equals y and 2 equals y and 3 equals y, then we guess that all numbers equal y. I have here cons that it can be open to interpretation and people could be skeptical of it, but that's true of any kind of reasoning if it's not fulfilled quite right, like that Monty Python example, I hope that just came through in the video. It's faulty reasoning. I mean, they're following the A equals B and B equals C and C equals D and D equals E. They're following it, but they're pretty extreme hypotheticals, and that's what leads to the comedic effect. So I do have an example of this, and we're going to see if it works. Okay, going further with logos, we have just using evidence, which again is going to be pretty much a review of our informative speaking unit. Making sure that you're adding expert testimony and statistical evidence. Make sure you cite. So everything that we talked about with your informative speech carries over here, which was, and it's what we talked about before. It's 3 or more sources and 3 or more citations. And remember, the evidence 3-step is simply the who, the where, and the when. We talked about this just a few weeks ago. Make sure that you build the source's ethos or credibility. What this means is if you are quoting John Smith, who knows who John Smith is? Quote, John Smith, a reporter for the New York Times. So somewhere that we're building their credibility, we know who these people are. Make sure that the evidence, we talked about all this before, it's relevant, recent, and it's reputable. I'm not going to go into any further detail because we've talked a lot about this. It's a good idea to restate evidence in your own words. This is a way of really helping the audience see what big abstract numbers look like. I remember the example from the history of toilet paper video we looked at in class, where the speaker said, this is how much toilet paper Americans use every year. And he then made the illustration that if we stacked the rolls end to end, that it would reach up to the moon and back. So that is a really helpful visual to help your audience, excuse me, it's been a long weekend, to help your audience visualize the massive amount of toilet paper he was talking about. Ironically, considering that some of you may not have toilet paper right now. Hopefully that history of toilet paper video was useful in ways that we never would have expected. Translate the evidence, the same thing. Put it into ways that your audience can understand, whether that's graphing it visually in a chart or some other visual aid, or just drawing some sort of comparison or analogy so that we can understand. We aren't, a lot of times we don't have context for big giant numbers. We just talked about all. Here we go. Some other types of reasoning, we have reasoning by analogy. This is making a comparison. Where we have similar circumstances produce similar conclusions. I'm going to fly through these because there's one that I really want to get into. Reasoning by causation. This is cause and effect reasoning. Again, we have to be careful of logical fallacies. This is confounding variables might obscure the results. It's a specific type of logical fallacy, which we'll talk about. I've got some videos posted for you, which do a better job of talking about it than I do. So there you have it. We have reasoning by definition. So defining something, that good old saying, if it looks like a duck and it quacks like a duck, then it's a duck. We're taking the qualities of a duck and determining if whatever it is that we're looking at meets those criteria. And that was the different types of logical reasoning. So now we are into our final method of delivering persuasion, which is pathos, which is emotional appeal. Now this may be the one that you have the least amount of experience in with your classes because as we've talked about, there's a lot of carryover from your writing classes into public speaking, but you're generally encouraged to avoid emotional appeals in writing. And the reason for that is because emotion doesn't convey the same way on paper in writing as in-person persuasion does. So we have to think about this. We've talked about the pathos, that gut feeling. It's like your instincts. It's tough because it's hard to kind of put a finger on why people do what they do, why people feel the way they do about certain things. So even though it's hard to figure that out, it is always a part of decision making. People are it's just a part of life. We always consult our gut or our feelings when we're looking at how to make a choice. So some ways to get in touch. Think about what the listener needs or wants, what appeals to them. Again, make it very focused on them. Who is your audience? Because this is not going to be the same for everyone. Oops. Well, I think I skipped something there. I'll come back to it. All right. I can't go back on these videos, so we'll just move on. All right. So right here, this might look familiar to you, especially if you're a psychology or maybe an education student. We have Maslow's hierarchy of needs. There it is, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And this is a theory that human needs can be split into 5 different categories, and they are structured where they're foundational. You have to build the foundation, you have to build this lower level before you can address the needs that are above it. So in pure psychological theory, this is something that takes years and decades to achieve different levels. And I think that that's really important. However, for our purposes for public speaking, I think it's important to think about these needs on maybe a more momentary basis, that things can change frequently. So let's get into these different levels. Again, if you've got some background in psychology, this might be a bit of a review for you. Again, your psychology professors are thinking about this in the long term. That's the purity of this method. But I'm thinking about it in a little different way. So the first most basic need is physical needs. That is sleep, food, air. These are things that your body physically needs in order to continue on from day to day. Not until you have those needs solved can you address your next needs, which here are security. So this would be security from external threats, security from invasion. But I think of it also as a internal thing, security from internal threats, from health. Honestly, we might all be kind of stuck here at the security level um, now and for a while because of the social isolation that we're in. Um, and I'm going to see how that might affect some of our other things that are happening here. The next level is belonging, belonging to a group. Um, I find it really interesting that what's going on here with the coronavirus is affecting our hierarchy needs in a very specific, immediate way, and I think it gives us a good impact. So belonging is the level that you are a part of a group. Now, if you live alone and you're in social isolation, this could be really difficult, and you're really reaching out to those community members digitally, and I hope you are. Um, if you're in a part of a family, this is belonging in a family group. This is just, it's not quite conformity, but it's being part of a group and knowing that they are there for you and also miss you when you're not there. So that's a need. That's a human basic need that we have. Next, we have self-esteem. This is feeling good about yourself, feeling that you're making accomplishments. Um, and then finally at the top, and it's funny that the words get bigger as the spaces get smaller, we have self-actualization. So self-actualization is being the best you that you can be, um, achieving your goals and your dreams. Um, so here's the way I think about it. And again, a psychologist will argue with me, but again, I'm not using it in that way. Um, that a person, let's pretend before this whole coronavirus thing happened, you were all in college. Now, college is not mandated by the government. It may be mandated by your parents that you have to go, but you were attending college because it was what you wanted to do. You wanted to become the best person that you could be. So in some level, you're working on that self-actualization. You're working at becoming the best person that you are able to be. But then when the coronavirus hit and everything went haywire, your courses went online, we are dropping down to this level that our security feels threatened. We may feel anxiety about the situation around us. We may feel anxiety about just being cooped up for an indefinite amount of time. So it's really hard to try to deal with any of this stuff when so much of our life is really in question on that level. So this is how our hierarchy of needs affects us in a very personal, specific way right now. All right. Um, when we're looking at pathos, so that's the Maslow's hierarchy, we also can think about specific emotional targets. Now, human beings have some emotional targets that are common, that affect most human beings. And so this is a good way to tap in without maybe having specific information about your audience. So you have 5 major emotional targets. You've got conformity. This is that whole idea of keeping up with the Joneses. You're not going to get left behind. This is you're a part of the group. It's kind of like that Maslow's hierarchy of need, middle level, the belonging level gone haywire. We also have the target of pleasure. We all seek pleasure. We seek to do things that we like, go out and play ball, play games, go to the movies, just do things that we enjoy doing. There's always the saying sex sells, so that is another emotional target. We also have wealth. People like to accumulate wealth. They feel threatened when their wealth is threatened. Um, that is another common target for human beings. And then personal growth, which is again like social self-actualization, becoming the best person that you can be. I have a video here. You could probably see the link at the bottom of the screen. And I'm going to try to play. I don't know if it's going to work. Just cross your fingers. So just a couple more things to consider when you're thinking about pathos is make sure that you know your audience and you make appropriate appeals. Your audience for this particular activity, I want you to think about your classmates. You've met them. Even though you don't see them now, you know who they are. So think about demographically who they are and what appeals to them. Make sure that you're establishing common ground. We've talked about that before, but especially if your audience is on the other side of that number line from you, it's really important to find where you agree with them before you two go your separate ways. So think about what is that lowest common denominator? Where can you still agree? End with an emotional appeal. We're going to say more about this in a minute, but do make sure that happens. And then match your nonverbal behavior with an appeal. Use pauses, especially if you're trying to get your audience to digest something or get on board with something that may be a big ask for them. They may not be inclined to agree with you. Use pauses, use repetition in order to help them get on board. So there are several types of persuasive speech. I'm going to fly through most of them pretty quickly, but then I'm going to give quite a bit more specifics on one because that's the type of speech I'm having you work on. So a speech of reasonings, it's a very logically based speech. I'm going to go more, the problem solution is the one that I'm going to have you working on. And in fact, if you've kind of looked ahead in some of the documents, you'll see that that's the aim here. Criteria satisfaction. This is an if-then speech. If this is the criteria, then this is the result. Yes response. This is getting your audience saying yes. Then you ask them questions that are easy to say yes to. Yes, yes, yes. And then you give them the harder yes. And this is where that common ground comes in. And then the negative method. This is where you might look at all the possible options and you can discredit everyone except for yours, where your option, even if the audience doesn't like it, it is the only viable option left. All right, so I am having you all for this speech focus on problem solution method. And I mentioned this before, I wanted you to think about something that was a problem and how are you going to solve it? What solution, what one specific solution are you proposing to the problem? So in order to do that, we have Monroe's motivated approach, which is a 5-step plan. I only have 4 here, but we'll go ahead and add the 5. I don't know why 4 is missing. And it's not as tricky as it sounds because you're already doing a bunch of these steps anyway. So first of all, gain attention. You're already doing that. That's your attention getter at the beginning of every speech. So you're going to get your audience's attention in the same way you've been working on. I'm not going to hit all of those. Okay, here we go. Establish a need. Propose something that the audience needs, a need that does exist right now or will exist in the future or exists for some portion of the population that maybe does or doesn't affect your audience member. And you can make sure that they do see that this is a true need. Use statistics and expert testimony, all sorts of research to present this as a true problem that is happening. And make sure that they understand, your audience understands how it affects your specific listeners. Then we satisfy the need. So this is the solution. We call this need satisfaction or problem solution method. So you're going to satisfy the need. You're going to present the solution that you feel will help the audience. There we are. um, solve the problem. Make sure that you are specific, that you give a lot of detail when you are explaining the solution. So again, problem, that's where you present the problem, and this is where you. And then number 4, step 4, is we visualize the needs satisfied. So this is just helping to further prove why we need to take these steps and how the world or your audience's life or whatever will be better when they've solved the problem. So you can have them see the benefit of the problem solved, describe it, visualize it, illustrate it. You can describe a worse future. What happens if they don't take action? What does the world look like? What does their personal world look like? I don't know if you can see it here. I'm not going to go into any of these, but look up the infomercials. They follow this Monroe's motivated approach perfectly. You see, they get your attention. They present a problem, and it's usually a ridiculous problem, like people don't know how to put Tupperware containers in their in their cabinets or something like that. And then they present this amazing invention that's going to solve all their problems. As I said, this is a 5-step. So the step 5 that isn't here, but I'm going to add, is the call to action. So you're going to end with a call to action. This is asking the audience to do something, take some sort of action. And the more specific you can make this call to action, the more effective it is. For example, if you are giving a persuasive speech on donating blood, you can just end the speech by saying, you know, the next time you see a need for blood donation, please sign up. That's a call to action. It's fine. It's not as good as it could be, though. You could instead say, there is a blood donation going on here in your area on this date from this time. Here are flyers for everybody. If you're doing it online, like we're going to be doing it, you can direct them to a link with upcoming blood donations and have people register online for these blood donations. So make them take specific action so that they can be held accountable for that. I think we are at an end here, and I hope this makes sense. Please let me know if you have any questions. We are going to be progressing onward with this. And my cat even realized that it's the end because he's getting up and moving. See him right there. Boop. All right. Have a good day, guys.